Meta, the company that owns both Facebook and Instagram, even tried to make the platform safer. I've been speaking to Dex Hunter-Torricke of the Oversight Board, which tries to keep Meta and its boss, Mark Zuckerberg, in check. Dex, thanks for coming on the show.
Great to be here.
First of all, can we talk about you and your background? Can you give our viewers an idea of which big companies you've worked at and what you're doing now?
Sure. I mean, I started my career at the UN, actually, as a policy guy, and I made the transition over to working in Silicon Valley. After a couple of years in a very large, impenetrable bureaucracy, I thought I want to go work with folks who are trying to change the world and maybe do it in a little faster-paced way. So I ended up at Google. After that, I was at Facebook, and then I went to work for Elon Musk at SpaceX. And I've been in communications and public policy for about 15 years, and I'm now at a body called the Oversight Board, which is an independent body that was originally created by Meta in 2020. And we operate as an independent watchdog, essentially, which looks at some of the controversial content issues on Facebook and Instagram.
So Meta owns Facebook and it owns Instagram, two of the world's biggest platforms. What sort of oversight do you perform? What do you actually do?
Yeah, so there are billions of people using Facebook and Instagram, and every day a lot of people are seeing their content moderated by the company. So you may post something that's then taken down by the company. You may see something on the platform which you want to see removed and which you think violates the rules, which might harm users. These are issues which you can appeal to the company. But if you don't get satisfaction from Meta, you can then appeal them to the Oversight Board. And an independent body, a set of members, we've got 23 folks from around the world, they make decisions then about whether that content should be removed or restored from the platform. And we also make recommendations on how to fix Meta's systems.
And Dex, for many people watching this interview, especially those perhaps with children, I've got two myself. One is on social media, one's a little bit too little yet to do that. There is, for some parents, a sort of feeling of helplessness about keeping your kids safe from the toxic effects of social media. Do you accept that for many people, social media has been a net negative, and many of them feel utterly powerless to sort of control that environment or keep their children safe? You see that that is a problem?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are very, very concerned about how to, protect their children online. And every day there are people facing all sorts of horrendous abuse. Of course, social media also has huge positives. I think we often take it for granted in Western democratic countries, the value that having access to speech, being able to communicate in this scale can have for people. But absolutely, there are problems. We've got to deal with them. Otherwise, we will lose the promise of social media.
And in terms of sort of concerns, there was also the issue of Donald Trump, and he's now been reinstated on Facebook and Instagram. That was Meta's decision, as I understand. The Oversight Board wasn't involved in that decision. That's not something that the board would get involved with.
So we did actually have a role. So in 2021, of course, Donald Trump was suspended from Facebook and Instagram after the events of January 6th. And the company subsequently asked the board to decide, was that suspension correct? And the board made a decision there. We actually said, although it was right that President Trump had been suspended, it was an indefinite suspension, and that was wrong. It was a penalty that wasn't actually contained in Meta's rules. They basically invented this penalty with no criteria for when they imposed it or lifted it. So we told the company, the process you use to impose these kinds of penalties is as important as the decision. And we sent it back to the company. They subsequently imposed a 2-year suspension, which they've just announced is being lifted.
OK. So you said, regardless of the rights or wrong of the case, you can't just be your own arbiters. You have to have a process.
That's right.
It's been now weeks after the Jan 6 House Committee report concluded that Trump directed, encouraged and supported an attempt to overthrow American democracy. Meta, though, then concluded after this 2-year time threshold that the risks to public safety have diminished when it comes to Trump. And that's just as he launches a new bid for presidency. You had nothing to say about this as the board. Why?
So from the board side, we don't want to speak about this currently because we may end up jeopardizing a future decision if this comes back to the board. So this is actually for us a question of remaining neutral and impartial before we potentially have to deal with this in the future.
So what's the trigger for a further suspension?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be if there's a future grievous breach of the rules that are designed to protect users on the platform.
The House report includes more than 50 references to Facebook, highlighting how Trump and his followers spread false claims, shared them, encouraged people to head to DC to stop the steal, and used often Facebook, you'll know this, to do it. How troubled are the Oversight Board about the House accusing Facebook and other social media companies of amplifying lies and radicalising, that's to quote the House report, the House of Representatives report, radicalising consumers?
We are absolutely concerned about that. And actually, the board has previously told the company that they should commit to an independent investigation of any role that the company's platforms may have played in amplifying that kind of content. We, of course, said it was right to suspend Donald Trump in 2021. So this is something that we're going to continue focusing on very, very carefully.
And what did they say when you recommended an independent investigation?
They actually didn't commit to that, but they did commit to talking to external researchers and working with them.
To be contrarian about it, it's quite toothless, isn't it? If you recommend an independent investigation into what happened because it was potentially egregious breach of rules with profound consequences, and then Meta just ignore you. I mean, it makes you a bit of a toothless board, doesn't it?
I don't think so. I mean, the board...
You see the point,
I think you could absolutely make that argument, but I don't think it's quite right.
There's another sort of layer to this, because the whistleblower Frances Haugen came forward in 21 with a troubling account of what happened around January the 6th. She said Facebook understood the danger of the 2020 election, turned on safety systems to reduce misinformation, which they called civic integrity, and as soon as the election was over, turned them back off or changed the setting back to what they were before to prioritise what she described as growth over safety. And that was the environment in which Facebook played a key role in the events of Jan the 6th. That's quite a betrayal of democracy, isn't it?
I think you could absolutely make that argument. So Frances Haugen, I think she had a very important role to play in demanding transparency from the company. From the board side, we spoke to Frances Haugen a couple of times. We certainly found the insights she provided incredibly helpful, and it actually guided how we investigated the company.
Just to come on to something else, it's not just about sort of democracy and politics. If we come on to children, to quote Frances again, she also talked about the price being paid potentially by young people. And she brought to light internal studies from inside Meta that revealed that 13.5% of teen girls say Instagram makes thoughts of suicide worse, and 17% of teen girls that say Instagram makes eating disorders worse. That's unacceptable, isn't it?
Absolutely. And this is an area which the company should absolutely be committing to work much more closely with researchers. It's something which regulators and governments also need to be taking a firm stand on.
So what would you like to see, Dex? I mean, you're an expert in this field. What do you think they could do to actually affect change? Because I'm sure people watching this with teenagers like my own think, well, what could the companies actually do to make this a more positive environment for their young people who you can't get off these websites, to be honest. You can't get them off the social media sites even if you want to, yeah?
Sure.
Unless you put them in a cave.
Yep.
Just lock them up, take away all their technology.
Well, there's a concept that we have been talking about in the tech industry and in conversations with policymakers for many years around the concept of media literacy and how people should actually be navigating through online spaces which present all sorts of harms. And certainly, I have never seen any example anywhere in the world of effective media literacy programs being rolled out at scale. It's something where, frankly, governments need to, up their game as well. But it's something where companies should be made to commit resources to. It's a dangerous new world out there. We need to raise young people to be prepared to navigate these spaces.
Hogan sums up. She says Facebook's realised that if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site. They'll click on less ads. They'll make less money. Is that right?
I'm not sure that's true. Actually, when you have environments which are harmful to people, which promote polarisation, which promote harms, lots of people will get disengaged. Consumers aren't blind to this stuff.
And just to finish off on this and some of the stuff that Frances Haugen said, there was the case of Molly Russell, which you will know. She consumed content on sites, including Instagram, that focused on self-harm and suicide. She took her own life at the age of 14. How troubled were you by that, being in this space, and the ill effects it had on this particular young person?
I don't think anybody with a conscience or a soul could not be troubled by this. It was obviously something that revealed a terribly evil type of content out there, and also a failure of the systems that were used by the company there. So it's absolutely something which I think should be a wake-up call to governments as well as the tech industry on why we need to move faster.
And Dex, what have the tech industry done about it?
So I understand one of the big things in the online safety bill is actually outlawing an entire content of self-harm content. It's also something where we understand Meta has put in new restrictions as well, and they've beefed up enforcement there. But I think the proof's going to be in the pudding. Does it actually stop young people self-harming? Does it remove that content?
And would you like to see media literacy in the, perhaps not in the online harms bill, but would you like to see that legislated for?
I would, absolutely. It's something that I think should be an urgent priority for us. And of course, we know the next generation of technology, tools like AI, things like the metaverse, they're going to present all sorts of new issues as well.
Would you be in for technology companies funding those sorts of programmes?
I think if your business model relies on connecting a lot of consumers and you're making a lot of money from that, you have an obligation to invest in the protections for those users as well.
So you could see a sort of a specific tax for something like that?
Potentially. I think it's something we should certainly investigate.
Just on keeping young people safe, I have to bring up Andrew Tate, his violent misogyny finding its way onto computers and phones of boys across the world. I have a teenage boy. He and all of his friends seem to know about Andrew Tate. I don't know how it has somehow gone into the consciousness of these young men, but it has. Meta maintain a ban on him, but your former boss, Elon Musk, has allowed Tate to spread his poison on Twitter. You know Musk. Is he fit to run a social media platform?
I think we'll have to wait and see how Twitter evolves over the coming months and years. Certainly, I think lots of people, including myself, are very, very concerned at some of the unpredictable changes that have happened to the platform.
Dex, you've worked for Elon Musk, you know him well. You've worked for Mark Zuckerberg, you know him well. Do you think Elon Musk as a character is someone that should have a huge social media platform?
I mean, he's somebody who obviously feels very passionate about freedom of expression. At the same time, he's somebody who's got his own very strong point of view. And social media is, if nothing else, about managing very diverse communities with a lot of interests.
Would you urge Elon Musk to take Tate off Twitter?
I would, yes.
So you think he should take Tate off Twitter? And what about other companies such as Facebook and Instagram? Should they be doing more to stop the sharing of Tate material on their platforms?
Yeah, I mean, there is content that is incredibly harmful. I think we need to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But certainly where there is a record, there's a track record well built up of incredibly harmful things being applied to a whole generation of people, we need to take action. We can't just be talking about it.
Why would you like to see him taken off, though, Tate?
I mean, it's exactly as you pointed out, Beth. There's a person here who has been spreading incredibly terrible, misogynistic, harmful content to lots of people. And these are the sorts of online harms that I think there is a very strong consensus in society, including with policymakers and the tech industry, that we need to take more action on.
So you think it should be joined up with government and the companies?
Policymakers absolutely need to work with the tech industry. These are problems that we can't simply ask the tech industry to solve on their own. We need leadership as well from politicians.
Dex, thank you so much for giving me your time. It was a very fascinating conversation. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you. Alexey Navalny has never been afraid to stand up to Vladimir Putin, but the Russian opposition leader's activism has come at a huge personal cost. Over the last decade, he has been attacked and detained. In 2020, he was poisoned with the same nerve agent used in the Salisbury poisonings. Miraculously, he survived, but only thanks to the treatment he received in a German hospital. On return to Russia, he was jailed on charges he says were politically motivated. The European Court of Human Rights has agreed, demanding his release. But today he remains incarcerated. Now, a documentary about Alexey Navalny's attempt to find out who poisoned him is nominated for an Oscar and a BAFTA. I've been speaking to its director, Daniel Roher, about the impact of the film and what we know now about Alexey Navalny's current condition. Daniel, thank you for coming on the show. Now, your documentary about Navalny is gripping, it's moving, it's quite an extraordinary piece of work and an extraordinary story. But first, can you explain to our viewers where Alexey Navalny is being held, what sort of facility he's in and what shape he's in?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me on the program. It's great to be with you here today. And any opportunity to talk about Navalny is very meaningful for me because the sad reality is that he's not doing well. Unfortunately, our film does not have a happy ending. Right now, Navalny is languishing in a penal colony about 6.5 hours outside of Moscow. He has been, for most of the last 6 months, removed from the general prison population and is instead languishing in solitary confinement. And he is being held in what many international observers will say is torturous conditions. You know, it's as if these prison authorities wake up every morning and ask themselves how they can make this guy's life miserable. And it's important that your viewers know the reason he's specifically in solitary confinement, and this is very important, is because of his anti-war advocacy. Alexey Navalny is the #1 anti-war advocate in Russia today, and that's why he's in solitary confinement languishing.
Do you think that the start of the Ukraine war intensified the brutality against Navalny by the Russian authorities because of this, right?
I think the start of the Ukraine war intensified the pressure on not just Navalny, but all oppositionists, all political people with different opinions, all independent news outlets. Navalny is one man, but he seems to represent hundreds, if not thousands, of independent Russians who have had to sacrifice a great deal in opposition of this war.
And Daniel, Navalny's supporters believe his life is in grave danger right now. How worried are you about whether he can survive?
I'm extraordinarily worried. It's very scary. You know, he is in the custody of the same men who tried to murder him once. What's stopping them from trying again? It's urgent, it's vital. The world needs to pay attention to Navalny. We cannot forget him. That's how I frame the primary responsibility of our documentary, is to provide the world with a vehicle to get to know him and to learn about his story.
There's also the bravery of his family, who feature very heavily his 2 children and his wife Yulia in the documentary, and they clearly are very tight, loving family. How are they bearing up? Do you presumably are in contact with the family? They must be missing their dad terribly.
I think that the dignity of Yulia Navalny is such that she keeps her cards pretty close to her chest. I think it's a Russian thing. But you can only imagine what it must be like if your husband, if your father is in this horrible position, this horrible place. You know he's not doing well. You know that he's being tortured. That must be a burden that I can't even imagine, that certainly no college-age or high school-age student should have to endure. But the family, like their father, has this remarkable courage.
When you released the film and Navalny was imprisoned again, did you fear the consequences its release might have for him, or did you hope that this amplification of his story might actually give him better protection, or were you just not sure?
Well, the film premiered 3 weeks before this awful, horrendous war in Ukraine started. And I think when the war began, everyone was existing in this ocean of uncertainty. What's going to happen? What would stop these lunatics from murdering Navalny as they are raining bombs down on this country in Central Europe, on Ukraine? And so we thought that we had a responsibility to do whatever we could to try and keep Navalny's name in the global consciousness as a mechanism to dissuade the regime from murdering him. And so we had this very fancy film release plan. You know, films are released at a very specific time. There's lots of planning that goes into their rollout and their promotion. We threw it all away. And instead, we embarked on a expedited, get this film out into the world as quickly as possible mission. And the potential consequences of which we were not concerned about. What mattered most to us was the security and safety of Navalny. And if this film can move the dial 5 or 10% in dissuading the regime from murdering him, we understood we had a responsibility to get it out.
I guess the question obviously follows from that, Daniel, is if they tried to murder him once, and now they have him incarcerated. Why won't they try to murder him again?
I think it's a very fair question, and that's why I think Navalny is in a very, very scary position. My working calculus, I call it the pain in the ass index. There's sort of like, is it more of a pain in the ass for the regime to murder him, or to instead let him languish?
Yeah.
And what that speaks to is, what would the domestic response be? How many hundreds of thousands of people would take to the streets? Would that potentially be the straw that breaks the camel's back and gets people engaged, gets people out into the streets? And I think the regime doesn't want to figure that out. So instead they say, we'll let him live, but we will break his spirit, we will break his body, we will break his well-being, and we will let him languish in this cell. I would prefer, of course, that he is freed and that he is reunited with his family. But more than anything, we just need him to survive this, because it's my opinion that his impact on the future of Russia is unfulfilled. And I would like to see the day when he is able to run in a free and fair democratic election in the Russian Federation.
And Daniel, arguably the most gripping part of the film is when Navalny, with the help of Christo, is able to identify suspects behind his poisoning.
Yeah.
And they find telephone numbers. I mean, it's hardly believable.
Right.
It's so extraordinary. But, you know, they essentially prank them, these guys, by pretending to be FSB agents and get information about his poisoning. And you can't actually quite believe that someone is just over the telephone handing over this information. Can you explain what happened on that day and what you were thinking when you are capturing that moment?
Sure. Navalny started the day just as himself. He'd get a guy on the phone, he'd say, "This is Navalny, why'd you try and murder me?" And then they'd hang up, and it was not a successful attempt. And then at a certain point, someone decided, I think Maria suggested, let's try it the prank way. The backup option, where Navalny would try and impersonate a high-ranking FSB guy and see if he could fool someone, which sounded as outlandish to me then as it does now. But they made the first call, then they made the second call, and the third call they called up this chemist called Konstantin Kudryavtsev. And I don't speak a word of Russian, so I'm just trying to intuitively figure out where to put the camera. But once they got this guy on the phone, I sort of clocked out of the corner of my eye as Maria Pevchik, Navalny's chief investigator, I saw her jaw unhinge and hit the floor. And I understood that something extraordinary was happening. And you didn't have to speak a word of Russian to know exactly what was going down.
Макшакову я позвоню тоже, конечно же. Ну, то есть я сейчас... Это простая процедура. Я буду звонить сейчас Александрову, Макшакову, Таякину. Из каждого буду просить там, на 2 абзаца объяснения. Потому что мне нужно, почему у нас ничего не получилось, и что нужно, почему было плохо, и что нужно сделать, чтобы хорошо.
Это вот я вопрос себе задавал уже не один раз, кстати. Ну, я оцениваю работу хорошую, по крайней мере. Ну, работа сделана как бы, ну, как вот делали, как бы, это все прорабатывалось вопрос. И не один раз. Ну, в нашей работе, сами понимаете, вопросов и нюансов всегда очень много. И все учитывать, как бы, ну, стараемся всегда по максимальному. Посадили там это... Сами понимаете, да, он полетел, посадили, все, вот это, как бы, ситуация сложилась так, что...
And Konstantin, the chemist, you say in the film, afterwards you all say they're going to kill him. They're going to kill him when we put this out. What happened to him? You don't know.
Well, it's unclear. We thought for a while that he was dead. We thought that he had been disappeared. It came into focus about a year ago. I think Christo dug up a COVID database. A database of COVID tests, and his name was on it somewhere in Siberia. So we think he's alive, but perhaps he has been relegated to some terrible desk job in the remote regions of Russia for this horrible indiscretion he perpetrated.
Right at the end of the film, you ask him, what is the message to the Russian people if they imprison you or kill you? And he answers the question about, if they kill me, this is the message. And you ask him to do it in Russian. And it's the way into the film, and he says, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing, so don't do nothing. The question I had as a viewer afterwards was, what was his answer about if he was imprisoned? Because that became his reality. They didn't kill him, but they imprisoned him. What did he answer on that question?
Well, I don't remember verbatim. I'd have to look at the transcripts. But I would imagine that it was in a very similar vein. Do not give up. Do not look down. He said something very poignant. We cannot look down. We have to look up, and we have to tackle this thing head on. These bad guys are only able to exist if good people do nothing. So don't be inactive. And that is not just a call to Russian citizens. That's a call to citizens all over the world. Over the last 10, 15, 20 years, we have seen the rise of authoritarianism take different insidious forms and proliferate to different pockets and corners of the world that we thought were immune to this type of instinct. And what Navalny's saying doesn't just apply to Russia, it applies to citizens all over the world.
As his friend and as someone that has worked with him and knows him well, on a personal level, do you wish he hadn't gone back, given what's happened? Because that's how I ended the film. I thought, don't go back.
You know, it's challenging to say. First off, I always wonder if his calculus would have been different if he had a crystal ball and knew that this war, this horrendous war, was going to begin. Would he have still gone back in that context? But the reality is we had no idea. He had the information he had, and he made the decision he made. It was a political decision. I think if you were here right now, what he might suggest is that staying out of the country, staying in exile, would be too great a gift to the Kremlin. So he had to go back. He wants to be the moral leader of the nation, and unfortunately for him, that meant sacrificing himself in this way.
Well, Daniel, thanks for coming in, and certainly the film has amplified his story, and you have managed to get it nominated in the biggest theatre in the world, which can only be good for him as well. So thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about the documentary.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sad that Alexey Navalny won't get to go to the BAFTAs or the Oscars, but he's with us in spirit, and any chance to talk about the film is meaningful. So thank you, Beth.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's conversations. I found both of them absolutely fascinating. Now, if you scan this QR code on your screen now, you can watch all of our interviews online and all the previous episodes of the show. And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to Beth Rigby Interviews, our podcast. That's on the Sky News app or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, that's all for today's show. Thank you so much to my guests, Daniel Roher and Dex Hunter-Torricke. And thank you for watching. Hope to see you next week.